I stood in the rain, cold water soaking through my thin sweater, but I didn't flinch. Not when the officers dragged her screaming past me, not when her suitcase burst open, and her expensive heels rolled into the mud. I just stood there, watching, calm, steady, because justice was finally being served right at the front door of the house she thought was hers. She called me weak. She thought she made me powerless. But what she didn't know was I had something she never did: patience and paperwork. You see, after my son died, I lost the only light left in my life. And instead of comforting me, she turned cold, cruel. She stripped me of dignity in my own home, laughed at my pain, celebrated over my sorrow. But today, she met the other side of me. She thought I was just an old widow she could walk over. But she forgot whose house she was living in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell me in the comments below. Michael was my only child, my miracle baby. I was 68 when all this unfolded, but I still remember the first time I held him like it was yesterday, how small his fingers were, how tightly he clung to mine. Being a nurse for 35 years taught me many things, but nothing prepared me for the kind of love I had for my son. He was everything I lived for. When Michael brought Trisha home, I'll admit, I was nervous. As mothers, we always wonder, will she love him the way I do? Will she protect his heart? But from the start, Trisha was charming, polite, soft-spoken. She would help me set the table during family dinners, and always remembered my favorite tea on cold mornings. I thought, maybe God gave me a daughter I never had. Michael, ever so thoughtful, suggested we all live together so I can take care of you. Ma, he said. I remember the tears that welled up in my eyes. My boy, always so kind. I gave them the master bedroom without hesitation. I didn't care about space. I cared about being close to my family. I cooked for them, cleaned after them, and when Trisha got pregnant, I became her shadow. I rubbed her back when the nausea wouldn't let her sleep, stood by her side during every prenatal appointment, and even knitted tiny sweaters for my coming grandchild. The house was filled with laughter then. Sunday roasts, evening board games. Michael and Trisha would dance in the living room, and I'd sit in the corner just watching, thinking this is the kind of peace I prayed for. I still remember my last birthday with Michael. He baked the cake himself, burned the edges and all, but it was perfect. We sang, we hugged, we laughed. That night, he whispered to me, "I'm the man I am because of you, Ma." I held that moment close. I still do. But life can be cruel when you least expect it. One accident, one phone call, that's all it took. And just like that, the house grew colder. Have you ever felt someone's absence so deeply that even the walls around you feel unfamiliar? Trisha didn't cry at first. Not in front of me. She just stared, detached. I thought maybe it was her way of coping. I tried to hold her, cook her meals, remind her she wasn't alone. But the woman who once called me Mama now avoided eye contact. She no longer joined me at the table. Her words turned curt, cold. I kept telling myself it was grief. But slowly, I started seeing cracks. She stopped saying thank you, would pass by me in the hallway like I was invisible. One night, I overheard her on the phone, laughing while I was alone in my room, holding Michael's picture, begging for sleep to come. Have you ever questioned whether love was ever real or just a temporary illusion wrapped in good manners? I started to feel like a guest in my own home. The warmth I once felt in my kitchen was replaced by silence. The birthday cards that once filled my dresser were replaced with unopened bills. Yet I stayed silent for weeks, for months, hoping that maybe, just maybe, time would bring her back to the woman I once called daughter. But It only got worse. And I kept wondering, how can someone who once called me family now treat me like a burden? The day the call came, I was preparing Michael's favorite soup chicken with fresh thyme and sweet potatoes. He always teased me about using too much garlic, but he'd finish the bowl every time. I had just set the pot to simmer when the phone rang. The moment I heard the officer's voice, something inside me shattered. I fell to my knees. The floor didn't just carry my weight. It held the pieces of my broken heart. Michael was gone. Just like that. A car accident. A drunk driver. My son, my only child, was never coming home again. Have you ever screamed so loud that no sound comes out? That's what grief feels like when your soul is ripped from your body. I touched the doorknob, hoping it was all a mistake, that he'd walk in and say, "Ma, what's all this crying about?" But the silence only grew louder. Neighbors came. Some brought food. Some just held my hand and cried with me. They said the usual things. He's in a better place. But how could any place be better than here with me? With his unborn child, with the mother who carried him for 9 months and never missed a single birthday? I wandered into his room late that night. Everything smelled like his cologne, his laundry soap. I sat on his bed and clutched the shirt he wore 2 days ago. It still had a tiny stain of the stew I'd made. I didn't wash it. I couldn't. It felt like washing him away. How do you mourn someone who was your entire reason to live? I started sleeping in his room, reading his old journals, watching the videos of him singing off-key just to make me laugh. I begged God to wake me from this nightmare, but morning came anyway. Trisha, at first, seemed collected. Too collected. She didn't shed many tears. She dressed in all black, nodded at visitors, accepted condolences with calm grace. I remember thinking, maybe that's her way of grieving. Not everyone wails like I do. She would bring me tea, sit beside me in the living room and gently stroke my hand. She didn't say much, but I appreciated the gesture. I thought, maybe this pain will draw us closer. Maybe we'll heal together. But did she really grieve? Or did she just pause long enough to let me drop my guard? Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd hear her phone ringing, her laughter echoing through the hallway. Once, I stepped out to get a glass of water and found her in Michael's robe, his favorite robe, scrolling on her phone and smiling. Something about it felt off, like she had already moved on while I was still stuck in that hospital corridor, waiting for the doctor to say he made it. Have you ever felt like you were the only one still grieving while the world spun forward like nothing happened? The air in the house began to shift. It no longer smelled like home. It smelled like perfume I didn't recognize, takeout containers, and something deeper, detachment. She stopped mentioning Michael, removed his photos from the hallway wall. Even the tiny baby shoes I'd knitted were gone from the shelf. I asked once gently, "Trisha, where are the photos?" She just shrugged and said, "Too many memories, Evelyn. We have to move on." We. I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded. I swallowed the pain because I thought maybe she was hurting too much to say more. But deep down, I could feel that something had changed. Have you ever sensed a storm coming, even when the sky is clear? I remember the day I first noticed the shift. It wasn't loud. It crept in like a chill draft through. A crack in the window. Trisha stopped saying, "Good morning." She walked past me like I was invisible, like the woman who once bathed her feet after childbirth didn't exist anymore. Have you ever watched someone erase you one small act at a time? The kitchen used to smell of warm spices and laughter. Now, it reeked of stale takeout and spilled drinks. Dishes piled in the sink. Trash overflowed. I tried to keep up, but my hands shook too much. My back ached. I was 68, not 28. My body no longer moved like it once did. One evening, I struggled to stand after sweeping the floor and fell beside the dining chair. I lay there for a while, waiting, calling her name, but Trisha never came. She was in the living room, laughing into her phone. I feel sick not long after that. Fever, chills. My chest felt tight. I asked her to help me get to the hospital. She barely looked up from her tablet and said, "I'm not your nurse." Then, under her breath, but loud enough I heard, "She's lucky I even let her live here." Let me live here? In my own home? I sat on the edge of my bed that night and stared at the walls, once covered with family photos, now bare. I remembered the night I handed them the keys to the master bedroom. So happy to have my son close by, so grateful to share my home with his new wife. And now, I couldn't even ask for a ride to the doctor. Can you imagine giving your heart to someone and being treated like a burden? Then came the parties. Strangers, loud, wild, disrespectful, flooding the house at night. Trisha would dress up, leave the door wide open, music blaring. She brought in men who looked at me like I was just an old shadow. Once, I passed through the living room during a party, and she smirked and told her guest, "Don't mind her. That's just the old woman who lives here." The old woman who lives here. Not my mother-in-law. Not Michael's mom. Just someone taking up space. I cried that night, curled in the same room I had given up so they could be comfortable. I wept into my pillow like a child. I miss my son more than ever. I missed being respected, being seen. Have you ever felt completely alone in a house that once held love? I had been counting coins in secret for weeks. A little from my grocery allowance here, a little from my savings there. Just enough to buy myself a small birthday cake. Not much, just something to remind myself that I was still here, that I mattered. I invited 2 of my neighbors, Margaret and Ruth. We're not young, but we know how to smile through aching bones. They came with warm hugs and gentle voices, the kind only lifelong friends can give. For a moment, the house felt light again. We even set the table with a tiny cloth and 3 cups of tea. The cake was small, a simple vanilla sponge with pink icing and 1 candle. I couldn't afford more, but my heart was full. I hadn't celebrated since Michael died. But this year, I told myself I deserved at least 1 happy moment. I had just lit the candle when the front door flung open. Loud music poured in like a storm. Trisha, in heels and glitter, stumbled in with 2 of her friends, laughing, drinks in hand. She looked at the cake, then looked at me, and laughed. "Oh no," she said, turning to her friends. "Is this a funeral? Or did the ghost of sadness just throw herself a party?" They burst out laughing. Then she picked up the cake and flung it into the trash. Just like that. "This ain't a funeral. Nobody cares about your crusty birthday," she sneered. "Have you ever been laughed at for simply wanting to feel human?" Margaret gasped. Ruth's eyes welled up. I stood there, frozen, my hands trembling, heart pounding like a drum. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. The silence that followed felt like a punch in the gut. My knees gave out, and I sat slowly on the chair, holding my chest. The candle had burned down, leaving behind a curl of smoke just like the joy I once felt in that house. I had never been more humiliated, not just because of the cake or the words, but because I knew deep inside that I had allowed myself to be forgotten. Can anyone understand what it feels like to disappear in your own home? I remember the day like it was yesterday. I had bent down to sweep beneath the old dresser in the hallway, one I hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to the corners, but something hard clinked beneath the wood. I reached under and pulled out a metal box. I recognized it instantly. It was Michael's, a box he had tucked away for safekeeping, back when he still filled this house with laughter. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were papers neatly arranged, yellowed with time. I saw the title deed first, then a notarized agreement. Michael's signature sat proudly at the bottom, next to my own. I blinked back tears as I remembered the day he insisted we do this. "Mom," he had said, holding my hand, "this house will always be yours. I don't care what anyone says. You built this home long before I married Trisha, and it should stay in your name. Promise me you won't ever give it up." And I had promised, with every fiber of my soul. Why had I let her make me feel like a guest in my own home? I sat quietly with those papers on my lap, my eyes tracing every word like a lifeline. My heart raced. Could I still do something? Was it too late? Have you ever reached a breaking point so silently, so completely, that even your tears dry up? The next morning, I dressed with more purpose than I had in months. I didn't say a word to Trisha. She was still asleep, sprawled across the couch with the TV, blaring some show she didn't care about. I walked past her, holding that metal box like it was my shield. The law office was a few blocks away. I hadn't been in years. The young receptionist looked at me kindly, maybe sensing something behind my eyes that I couldn't put into words. The lawyer, a man my son once helped during a community health drive, recognized me instantly. I laid out the papers and waited. He flipped through them carefully. Then he looked up and said, "Mrs. Evelyn, this house is legally yours. You have full authority to remove her. No one can question that." A silence settled between us, not one of fear, but of awakening. I felt something shift inside me, like a light had turned on in a dark room I'd forgotten existed. I walked home slowly, the sun brushing against my cheeks. I passed the park where Michael used to take me on Sunday walks. I heard his voice in the wind, gentle, proud. "Stand up, Mama. You're stronger than she knows." Have you ever felt dignity return to your bones? Not with rage, but with resolve? That night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling while the bass of Trisha's music thumped through the walls. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just waited. The storm had started to gather, but this time I was the one holding the thunder. I came home quietly that evening, the same way I'd come home so many times before, head down, shoulders heavy, walking into a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. But this time, something was different. I moved with a calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no tremble in my step, no lump in my throat, only purpose. I made dinner, simple stew and cornbread, like I used to cook when Michael was still here. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and steady, like an old hymn humming through the walls. Trisha was sprawled on the couch, laughing at something on her phone, her shoes on the armrest I had crocheted with my own hands. She didn't look up when I placed a folded envelope on the coffee table beside her. "What's this, Granny?" she chuckled, rolling her eyes without even reaching for it. I didn't answer. I just sat across from her, my hands folded neatly in my lap. When she finally opened it and read the words, her smirk slid off her face like melted wax. Her eyes darted across the paper, rereading, her mouth moving silently as if the truth would change if she looked at it long enough. "Eviction," she gasped. "You can't be serious." I looked her in the eye, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of being seen. "You have 7 days," I said softly. "No more, no less." She laughed then loud and mocking, the same way she'd laughed when she threw away my birthday cake. "You think you can just throw me out? I live here." I tilted my head gently. "Correction. You stayed here, and that stay has expired. Have you ever stood your ground, not with force, but with the quiet power of knowing your worth?" She called me names that night, screamed, slapped a vase off the kitchen counter, slammed doors, called her friends. But I didn't raise my voice once. I just kept cleaning my dishes, humming to myself like the storm outside was none of my concern. Exactly 7 nights later, the knock came. It was raining hard, the kind of cold that stings the bones. I opened the door and saw the sheriff, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He nodded at me kindly. Behind him stood 2 officers. Tricia came stumbling down the hallway, mascara streaked across her cheeks. Please, I didn't mean it. I didn't think she'd. Actually. I stood tall in the doorway, hands steady, voice clear. This house gave me memories. You gave me scars. Now leave. The officers didn't hesitate. They gave her time to gather her things, but not too much. Within minutes, bags were dropped at the edge of the driveway. Clothes soaked, heels sinking into the mud. Her anger turned into pleading, then bitterness, then silence. She looked at me one last time, her lip quivering. Where am I supposed to go? I took a deep breath. That's no longer my concern. And I closed the door. Have you ever watched a storm pass and realized you survived it, standing tall in its wreckage? That night, I sat at my kitchen table alone. But I wasn't lonely. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt like peace. My peace. My home. My victory. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own space, I hope you know you are never powerless. You are never too old to reclaim your dignity. The morning after she left, I opened every window. Let the light pour in. The house felt bigger, quieter, not empty, just finally at peace. I scrubbed the floors, washed the curtains, wiped every corner like I was wiping away the echoes of pain. Not out of anger, but out of healing. I walked to Michael's photo, placed on the mantel the way it always was. I lit a candle beside it. And for the first time in years, I whispered without tears in my voice. I did what you would have wanted, baby. I stood tall. Have you ever cleaned a space and felt like you were also cleaning your soul? The days that followed were simple but beautiful. Neighbors who'd once kept their distance began to knock again. Old friends from the block stopped by with pies and gentle hugs. No more loud music, no more strangers stumbling through my living room. Just laughter, familiar voices, and quiet Sunday mornings. I planted marigolds in the yard. Michael loved those, said they made the house look like the sun lived here. And now it finally does again. I sit on the porch now, tea in hand, blanket over my legs. Watching those flowers bloom reminds me that peace doesn't always arrive in grand moments. Sometimes it walks in quietly after the storm. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had until you were forced to stand alone? So many people think aging means losing power, but I want you to know your wisdom, your silence, your strength, they are your power. If this story touched something deep inside you, if you felt Evelyn's pain, her strength, her courage, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And I'd love to know, have you ever had to protect your peace, even when it meant letting someone go? Drop your story in the comments below. Someone out there needs to hear it.